The sirens tore through the morning like a scream I couldn't hold back. I stood in our kitchen in Vermont, the spatula still in my hand, scrambled eggs burning on the stove as the phone slipped from my other hand and clattered against the linoleum floor. The voice on the other end had been clinical, detached, the way people sound when they've delivered this kind of news too many times. There had been an accident on Route 7. My husband Michael was dead at the scene. My 8-year-old son Nathan was in critical condition at Burlington Medical Center. I don't remember the drive to the hospital. I don't remember parking or running through the automatic doors or the faces of the people who must have stepped aside as I barreled past them. What I remember is the fluorescent lights, so bright they felt like they were burning holes through my skull, and the chemical smell of disinfectant that made my stomach turn. I remember a doctor with kind eyes and tired lines around his mouth telling me words that didn't make sense. Traumatic brain injury, extensive damage, no brain activity. The machines were breathing for Nathan, but my son, my beautiful boy, with his gap-toothed smile and his collection of wooden horses, was already gone. They gave me time alone with him. I sat beside his bed and held his small hand, still warm, still soft, and I whispered things I can't repeat even now, 15 years later. I told him I loved him. I told him I was sorry I couldn't protect him. I told him his father was waiting for him, wherever that was. And then a different doctor came in, younger, more hesitant, and asked me the question that would change everything. Would I consider organ donation? Nathan's heart was strong. His kidneys were viable. His liver could save a life. Parts of my son could keep living, even though he never would. The grief was so enormous I couldn't see past it, couldn't breathe through it. But somewhere in that suffocating darkness, I found one small light. Nathan could save someone. He could matter. His death wouldn't be meaningless. I signed the papers with a shaking hand. When they took him away for the final time, I pressed my lips to his forehead and whispered the last words I would ever say to my son. You'll live, even if not here. You'll live. 15 years is a long time to carry grief. Long enough that it stops feeling sharp and starts feeling like a weight you've gotten used to, like a stone you swallow every morning that sits heavy in your chest all day. I'm 50 now, and the woman I was, the mother who baked cookies and volunteered at the school library and believed the world was fundamentally good, she died in that hospital room with Nathan. The woman who remained learned to survive. My apartment in Burlington was a testament to that survival. 3rd floor walk-up, water-stained ceiling, a radiator that clanked and hissed but barely produced heat. I worked 3 cleaning jobs, scrubbing other people's toilets and mopping their floors, and still barely made rent. Last month I'd gotten an eviction notice taped to my door, bright orange and impossible to ignore. I had 2 weeks to come up with $1,200, or I'd be out on the street. I kept Nathan's wooden horse on the narrow windowsill above my kitchen sink. It was the only thing of his I'd kept, couldn't bear to part with. He'd made it himself in a summer camp woodworking class, carved it carefully with his small hands, even burned his initials into the bottom. N.C. Nathan Carter, my married name, the name I'd stopped using after Michael died because I couldn't stand the weight of it. The horse had a scar on its flank where Nathan had slipped with the knife and gouged too deep. He'd cried about it, thought he'd ruined it, but I'd told him it made it special, made it his. I was staring at that horse, trying to figure out which bill to pay first and which I could let slide another month, when my neighbor Martha knocked on my door. She was 70, lived alone, and had a habit of saving newspaper clippings she thought might be useful. This time she handed me a page from the Boston Globe, folded to show a small classified ad. Housekeeper wanted, Kingston Estate, Beacon Hill. Part-time position, competitive salary, room for advancement, inquire within. The address was listed at the bottom. Martha squeezed my hand with her papery fingers and told me I should try. I almost said no. Boston was 2 hours away, and I'd spent the last 15 years deliberately shrinking my world, making it small enough that I could manage the pain. But desperation is a powerful motivator. I called the number. The interview was conducted by a woman named Victoria Kingston, and I disliked her immediately. She was the kind of beautiful that required money and effort, her hair perfectly silver, her cream-colored suit immaculate, her jewelry understated but clearly expensive. She looked at me the way you might look at something unfortunate you'd stepped in, her pale blue eyes assessing and finding me lacking. You'll be responsible for general housekeeping duties, she said, not bothering with pleasantries. Deep cleaning, laundry, occasional meal preparation when our regular staff has time off. The hours are Tuesday through Thursday, 8 to 4. You'll be paid bi-weekly. She named a figure that was more than I made in a month at my other jobs combined. I tried not to let my desperation show. I need to be very clear about the boundaries of this position, Victoria continued, leaning forward slightly. Her perfume was expensive, something with jasmine and an undertone I couldn't place. You are here to work, not to socialize. My son lives here while he completes his architectural projects, and I expect you to respect his privacy completely. No lingering, no unnecessary conversation, no intrusion into our family business. Do you understand? Something in her tone made my spine straighten. I'd spent 15 years being invisible, being forgettable, being the woman who cleaned up after other people. But there was a contempt in Victoria's voice that sparked something I thought had died with Nathan. Pride, maybe. Or just exhaustion with being treated like I didn't matter. I understand, I said quietly. I'm here to work. She hired me on the spot, which should have been my first warning. People like Victoria Kingston didn't make quick decisions unless they were desperate themselves, and I was too focused on the money to wonder why she might be having trouble keeping staff. The Kingston estate was everything my life wasn't. Beacon Hill, with its brick facades and gas lamps and trees that had been there longer than I'd been alive. The house itself was a 4-story brownstone that probably cost more than I'd earn in 10 lifetimes. Inside was all dark wood and oil paintings, and the kind of quiet that comes from thick carpets and good insulation, and not having to worry about your neighbors screaming through the walls. Victoria gave me a brief tour, her heels clicking on the hardwood floors, pointing out rooms with a practiced efficiency that made it clear she'd done this before. Kitchen, dining room, sitting room, library. Upstairs were the bedrooms, which I was to clean but never enter unless they were empty. The rules were clear, the boundaries were established. I was staff, and I was to remember that. I started the following Tuesday. The work itself was familiar, mindless in a way I found comforting. Dust, vacuum, scrub, polish. Make things clean and perfect for people who took that perfection for granted. I didn't mind. It gave me something to focus on besides the constant ache of loss that I'd learned to live with but never quite managed to ignore. It was on my second day that I met Jeremy Kingston. I was cleaning the downstairs bathroom, on my hands and knees scrubbing grout with a toothbrush because Victoria had very exacting standards, when I heard footsteps in the hallway. Then a voice, warm and apologetic. "Oh, I'm so sorry. I didn't realize you were in here." I looked up to find a young man in the doorway, mid-20s maybe, with dark curly hair and his mother's pale blue eyes but none of her coldness. He was holding a coffee mug and wearing paint-stained jeans and a soft gray sweater with holes in the elbows. He smiled at me, genuinely smiled, and I was so startled I nearly dropped my brush. "I'm Jeremy," he said, stepping back to give me space. "You must be the new housekeeper, Eleanor, right?" I nodded, getting to my feet and pulling off my rubber gloves. My hands were red and raw from the cleaning solution. "I'm sorry about my mother," he said, lowering his voice slightly. "She can be intense, but she means well." I doubted that, but I just nodded again. Jeremy seemed to sense my discomfort because he changed the subject quickly, asking if I needed anything, if I knew where everything was, if the coffee maker was working properly. It was such a sharp contrast to Victoria's imperious instructions that I almost didn't know how to respond to simple kindness. "I'm fine," I managed. "Thank you." He smiled again and left me to my work, but the interaction stayed with me. There was something gentle about Jeremy Kingston, something that reminded me painfully of Nathan. Who'd been the kind of child who worried about stepping on ants and cried when we had to return borrowed library books because he didn't want them to be lonely on the shelf. I shook the thought away. I couldn't afford to get sentimental. This was just a job. The weeks passed in a routine that was almost soothing. I arrived every Tuesday, Thursday, and Friday morning at 8 sharp. Victoria was usually out, attending charity functions or meeting with her various committees, and Robert Kingston, Jeremy's father, was a quiet man who spent most of his time in his study managing the family's various business interests. I rarely saw him, which suited me fine. Jeremy was often home, working on architectural designs in the converted sunroom at the back of the house, and while he always greeted me politely, he respected his mother's boundaries about not being intrusive. I was grateful for the work. The money meant I could pay my rent, even start saving a little. Martha watched my apartment and watered the small succulent I kept on my windowsill, the only living thing I'd allowed myself to care for since Nathan died. I didn't think about the future. I'd learned not to. The present was hard enough to manage. It was in my 6th week at the Kingston house, on a rainy Thursday afternoon in October, that everything changed. I'd finished the main floor and was heading upstairs to tackle the bedrooms when I heard music, piano music, drifting down from somewhere on the 2nd floor. I paused on the landing, my hand on the polished banister, and listened. It was Chopin, Nocturne, in E-flat major, the notes flowing like water, melancholy and beautiful, and achingly familiar. Michael had played piano, not professionally, just as a hobby, something he'd learned as a child and never quite given up. On Sunday mornings he'd sit at the old upright we'd bought secondhand and play while Nathan and I made pancakes. Nathan had loved that nocturne especially. He'd curl up on the couch with his wooden horses and listen, his small face serious, and afterwards he'd always say the same thing. "It sounds like remembering." I hadn't heard that piece in 15 years. I'd avoided it deliberately, changed the station if it came on the radio, left stores if it played over their speakers. And now here it was, in this house, played by someone who knew exactly how it was supposed to sound. My hands started shaking. I gripped the banister harder, trying to steady myself, but the music kept going and the memories kept coming. Nathan at 5, dancing barefoot in the living room. Nathan at 7, asking if he could learn piano too. Nathan at 8, gone, dead, his small body broken by a pickup truck that had run a red light on a clear Tuesday morning. I realized I was crying, tears streaming down my face, my breath coming in harsh gasps. I turned and started back down the stairs, needing to get out, needing air, but my foot caught on something and I stumbled, catching myself on the railing just as the music stopped. "Are you okay?" Jeremy was coming down the hallway, concern written across his face. He must have heard me, must have stopped playing to check. I wiped frantically at my face, trying to compose myself, but it was too late. He'd seen. "I'm fine," I said, but my voice was wrecked, barely more than a whisper. The music, it reminded me of someone. Something in Jeremy's expression shifted. He came closer, slowly, like you might approach a wounded animal. "My son," I heard myself say, even though I'd promised myself I wouldn't talk about Nathan, wouldn't make him real to these people. He loved that piece, Chopin. Jeremy was quiet for a moment, then he nodded. "I'm sorry," he said simply. "I can stop." "No," I said quickly. "Don't stop, it's beautiful." He studied me for a long moment, and I saw something in his eyes I couldn't quite name. Recognition, maybe. Or understanding. Then he smiled, sad and small. "Would you like to hear something else?" he asked. I should have said no. Should have excused myself and gone back to work and maintained the boundaries Victoria had been so clear about. But instead I nodded, and Jeremy led me to the sunroom where a beautiful grand piano sat near the windows overlooking the garden. He played for 20 minutes while I stood there, supposedly dusting the bookshelves, but mostly just listening. Beethoven, Debussy, some modern pieces I didn't recognize. His hands moved across the keys with confidence and grace, and I found myself watching him, this young man who was nothing to me, nobody, just my employer's son, and feeling a strange tightness in my chest. When he finished, he turned to me and said something that made my blood run cold. "I have dreams sometimes," he said quietly, "about a little boy with blonde hair. He gives me things, a wooden horse, a baseball. He tells me to live for both of us." The room tilted. I gripped the bookshelf behind me, my knuckles white. "What?" I whispered. Jeremy shook his head, looking almost embarrassed. "I know it sounds crazy. I've had them since I was a kid, since my transplant. The doctors said it was just my brain processing the trauma, but they felt so real. Still do, sometimes." Transplant. The word echoed in my head. I looked at Jeremy, really looked at him, and, for the first time, noticed the thin scar visible at the collar of his shirt. A surgical scar. And suddenly I was back in that hospital room 15 years ago, signing papers, agreeing to let them take Nathan's organs, his heart, his liver, his kidneys, letting them scatter pieces of my son across the country to save strangers I would never meet. "When?" I asked, my voice barely audible. "When was your transplant?" 15 years ago, Jeremy said. "I was 8, congenital heart defect. I'd been on the waiting list for 2 years. Then I got lucky." Lucky. The word was a knife between my ribs. He got lucky the same day Nathan got unlucky. The same day a pickup truck ran a red light and destroyed my entire world. I said abruptly, setting down my dustcloth and heading for the door. "Eleanor, wait." But I was already gone, practically running down the hallway to the small bathroom off the kitchen where the cleaning supplies were kept. I locked the door and sank to the floor, my back against the wall, and let myself fall apart as quietly as I could manage. It couldn't be a coincidence. 8 years old, 15 years ago, Burlington area. The dreams about a blonde boy with a wooden horse. Nathan had been blonde. Nathan had loved his wooden horses. Nathan had died so someone else could live. Nathan had died so Jeremy could live. I don't know how long I sat there, trying to breathe, trying to think, trying to process what this meant. Eventually there was a soft knock on the door. "Eleanor? Honey, are you in there?" Brenda. She was the other housekeeper, an older woman in her 60s who'd been with the Kingstons for years. She worked full-time where I was only part-time, and she'd been kind to me in a distant, professional way. I unlocked the door and she slipped inside, closing it behind her. She took one look at my face and sighed. "You figured it out," she said. I stared at her. "What?" "You figured it out," she repeated, sitting down beside me on the floor despite her bad knees. "About Jeremy and your son." The world went fuzzy at the edges. "How do you know about Nathan?" Brenda was quiet for a moment, then she reached out and took my hand. Her skin was warm and papery, and she held on tight. "I used to work at Burlington Medical," she said. "I was in the transplant coordinator's office 15 years ago. I was there when you signed the papers. I saw you with your boy, heard what you said to him." Her eyes filled with tears. "I remembered you. And when the Kingstons hired you, when Victoria told me your name, I put the pieces together. Eleanor Vance, Nathan Vance. The dates matched." "Does she know?" I asked, my voice hard. "Does Victoria know?" Brenda hesitated, and that was answer enough. She knows, I said flatly. She hired me knowing who I was. Knowing my son's heart is beating in her son's chest. I think, Brenda said carefully, that she hired you because she was afraid you'd figure it out on your own and make trouble. This way she could keep you close, keep an eye on you. Victoria Kingston is a woman who likes control. I laughed, but it came out bitter and broken. She told me to stay away from him, her precious son. She was afraid I'd what? Try to take him back? I don't know what she was afraid of, Brenda admitted. But I do know Jeremy has no idea. He doesn't know who you are, doesn't know about Nathan. Victoria made sure of that. She's been protecting him from the truth his whole life. I pulled my hand away from Brenda's and stood up. My legs were shaky, but I managed to stay upright. I need to see his records, the transplant records. I need to be sure. Eleanor. I need to be sure, I repeated, and something in my voice must have convinced her because she nodded slowly. Robert keeps medical files in his study, she said. Old-fashioned, likes having hard copies of everything important. I'll cover for you if anyone comes home early. It felt wrong, sneaking into Robert Kingston's study while he was out having lunch with business associates. It felt like theft, rifling through his files until I found the one labeled Medical, Jeremy. But the wrongness was nothing compared to the need to know, to understand, to have proof of what my gut was already telling me. The file was thick, full of doctor's notes and test results going back to Jeremy's childhood. I flipped through pages about congenital defects and cardiac function until I found what I was looking for. The transplant report, dated 15 years ago, October 17th, the day Nathan died. Age of donor, 8 years old. Blood type, O positive. Cause of death, traumatic brain injury sustained in motor vehicle accident. Hospital, Burlington Medical Center. The papers blurred as tears filled my eyes again. It was real. It was true. My son's heart was beating in Jeremy Kingston's chest, had been beating there for 15 years while I cleaned toilets and scraped by and slowly died inside. And Victoria Kingston had known. She'd known exactly who I was when she hired me. I heard footsteps in the hallway outside the study. Heavy, decisive. I barely had time to stuff the file back in the drawer before the door opened and Victoria walked in. She stopped when she saw me, her face going carefully blank. Then her eyes flicked to the filing cabinet, to my guilty expression, and understanding dawned. Get out, she said quietly. You knew, I said, my voice shaking with rage. You knew who I was. You hired me, knowing that my son, that Nathan. Get out of my house. No, the word surprised both of us. I'd spent 15 years being small, being quiet, being invisible. But something had broken open inside me and I couldn't seem to stop the words from coming. You hired me to keep me quiet, to keep me close so you could control me. You were afraid I'd find out the truth. Victoria's composure cracked, just slightly. Her jaw tightened. I was protecting my son. From what? From knowing that he's alive because mine is dead? That's not something to hide from, that's something to honor. You don't understand, Victoria said, and for the first time I heard something other than ice in her voice. Fear, maybe. Jeremy was so sick for so long. The transplant saved him, but he struggled afterwards. The guilt, the nightmares, the feeling that he didn't deserve to live. It nearly destroyed him. I spent years helping him move past it, helping him build a life. I wasn't going to let you come here and drag him back into that darkness. He has a right to know, I said. Nathan gave him life. The least he deserves is to know who Nathan was. Nathan is dead, Victoria said flatly, and Jeremy is alive. That's all that matters. The cruelty of it, the calculated coldness, made something snap inside me. I stepped forward and grabbed the file from the drawer where I'd hastily replaced it, pulling out the transplant records. These are mine, I said. This is my son. You don't get to hide him. Victoria lunged forward and snatched the papers from my hand. You have no legal right to any of this information. The donation was anonymous for a reason. Nathan wasn't anonymous, I shouted, past caring who heard. He was a real child with a real life, and he mattered. Of course he mattered, Victoria hissed, and then she did something I didn't expect. She tore the papers in half. But he's gone, and you need to accept that and move on. I stared at the shredded documents in her hands, at the cold fury in her eyes, and something inside me went very still and very calm. I walked forward slowly, deliberately, until I was close enough to smell her expensive perfume, close enough to see the lines of tension around her mouth. You can tear up all the papers you want, I said quietly, but you can't tear up the truth. Jeremy deserves to know where his heart came from, and I deserve to be acknowledged as the mother who gave it to him. I reached out and grabbed her wrist, not roughly, but firmly. She tried to pull away, but I held on, and for a moment we stood there in her husband's study, locked in a silent battle of wills. The torn papers fell from her hands and scattered across the expensive carpet. Let go of me, Victoria said, her voice low and dangerous. Not until you admit it, I said. Not until you say out loud that you knew, that you hired me anyway, that you've been lying to your son for 15 years. I was protecting him. You were protecting yourself, I shot back. You were protecting your perfect little world from the messy reality that your son is alive because someone else has died. You couldn't stand the thought of owing me anything, of having me be anything more than the help. Victoria's face went white, then red. She yanked her arm back hard enough that I stumbled, and she turned toward the door. You're fired. Pack your things and get out. I don't think so. We both turned. Jeremy was standing in the doorway, still in his paint-stained clothes, his face pale and his eyes moving between us. How long he'd been there, how much he'd heard, I couldn't tell. Mom, he said quietly. What's going on? Victoria straightened, smoothing her suit jacket, trying to regain her composure. Nothing that concerns you. Eleanor was just leaving. Eleanor's son died 15 years ago, Jeremy said, and I realized he'd heard everything. In Burlington, in October, he was 8 years old. The room went very, very quiet. Jeremy? Victoria started. I was 8 years old in October 15 years ago, Jeremy continued, his voice shaking slightly. In Burlington, getting a heart transplant. He looked at me, really looked at me, and I saw the moment understanding crashed over him. His hand went to his chest, pressing against his scar. Nathan, I whispered. His name was Nathan. Jeremy's legs seemed to give out. He grabbed the doorframe for support, his breathing suddenly rapid and shallow. The dreams, he said. The boy in my dreams. That was him? I don't know, I said honestly. Maybe, or maybe it was just your mind trying to process what you'd been through. But yes, Nathan died the day you got your transplant. And yes, I'm his mother. Did you know? Jeremy turned to Victoria, his voice rising. When you hired her, did you know? Victoria opened her mouth, closed it, then finally nodded. Yes. Why? The word was barely more than a whisper. Why would you do that? To protect you, Victoria said, and now there were tears in her eyes too. To make sure she didn't come looking for you, didn't try to insert herself into your life, didn't make you feel guilty for living. I thought if I hired her, if I kept her close, I could control the situation. Control, Jeremy repeated, and he laughed, but it was hollow. You wanted to control my life so badly that you lied to me about the most fundamental thing about my existence. Do you have any idea how that feels? He pushed past Victoria and walked toward me. I tensed, not knowing what to expect, but he just stopped a few feet away and studied my face. Tell me about him, he said. Please, tell me about Nathan. So I did. Standing there in Robert Kingston's study with Victoria frozen by the door, I told Jeremy about his son. About how Nathan had been shy but brave, afraid of thunderstorms but not of standing up for kids who got bullied at school. About how he'd loved horses and dinosaurs and any book with magic in it. About how he'd made that wooden horse at summer camp and been so proud of it, carried it everywhere. About how he'd died in a car accident that took his father too. And how in my grief I'd made the only choice I could live with. Jeremy listened to everything, tears streaming down his face, his hand still pressed to his chest. When I finished, he was quiet for a long moment. Then he said something I wasn't expecting. I'm so sorry. You didn't do anything wrong, I said quickly. You were just a sick kid who needed a heart. Nathan would have wanted this. He was the kind of person who wanted to help people. But you lost everything, Jeremy said. And I got to live. How is that fair? It's not, I said simply. But that's not your fault. That's just how life works sometimes. Victoria made a sound, something between a sob and a laugh. We both turned to look at her. She'd collapsed into one of the leather chairs, her perfect composure completely shattered. I was so afraid, she said quietly. When you were sick, Jeremy, when they said you might die, I was terrified. And when you got the transplant, when you survived, all I could think about was protecting that gift. Protecting you from feeling guilty, from feeling like you owed someone something. I thought I was doing the right thing. You weren't, Jeremy said flatly. You were lying. To me, to Dad, to everyone. I know, Victoria whispered. I know. The room fell silent except for the distant sound of traffic outside. I felt emptied out, exhausted, like I'd run a marathon. Everything I'd been holding inside for 15 years had come pouring out, and now I didn't know what to do with the space it left behind. I should go. I said finally, I'm sorry for intruding. Don't, Jeremy said quickly. Please, I need time to process this, but I don't want you to leave. Not like this. I looked at Victoria, waiting for her to object, to order me out, to threaten me with lawyers. But she just sat there, looking smaller and older than I'd ever seen her. Stay, she said quietly. We need to talk, all of us, but stay. I stayed. The next few weeks were some of the strangest of my life. Robert Kingston, when he learned the truth, was horrified by what Victoria had done. He was a quiet man, but I saw real anger in his eyes when he looked at his wife, and I heard them arguing behind closed doors more than once. The perfect Kingston marriage was showing cracks. Jeremy wanted to know everything about Nathan. He asked me questions constantly, about what Nathan liked and disliked, about his personality, about the things that made him laugh. He found the wooden horse on my kitchen windowsill when he drove me home one day, insisted I show him my apartment despite my embarrassment about its condition. He held that horse like it was made of glass and cried when I told him Nathan had carved it himself. "Can I keep it?" he asked. "Just for a little while. I promise I'll give it back." I let him take it. How could I not? Nathan's hands had carved it, but Jeremy's heart had once beat in Nathan's chest. They were connected in a way I was still trying to understand. Victoria kept her distance at first. She was still employing me, which felt absurd given everything. But when I tried to quit, she actually asked me to stay. Not ordered. Asked. I was too curious about where this was all going to refuse. One afternoon, about a month after the confrontation, Victoria found me in the library. I was dusting the books, trying to lose myself in the familiar rhythm of work, when she sat down in one of the reading chairs and said my name. I turned. She looked tired, older. The perfect armor of makeup and clothing couldn't quite hide the strain. "I owe you an apology," she said without preamble. "A real one. Not the conditional kind where I apologize but justify what I did. I was wrong. I was so focused on protecting Jeremy that I couldn't see I was actually hurting him. And I was cruel to you in ways that were inexcusable." I set down my dustcloth and sat in the chair across from her. Outside the window, autumn leaves were falling in the Kingston's perfect garden. "Why did you really hire me?" I asked. "The truth." Victoria was quiet for a moment. "I knew who you were the moment I saw your application. Eleanor Vance from Burlington, applying for a job that I knew was beneath her qualifications. I looked you up, found Nathan's obituary, confirmed the dates, and I panicked. I thought if you were looking for work in Boston, you might be looking for Jeremy. So I hired you to keep you close, to make sure you never told him, to..." She trailed off. "To control you. And that was unforgivable." "Yes," I said simply. "It was." She nodded, accepting that. "I can't undo what I did, but I can try to make it right, if you'll let me." "What does that mean?" "It means whatever you need. If you want to be part of Jeremy's life, to have a relationship with him, I won't stand in your way anymore. If you want to leave and never see us again, I'll write you a check for 6 months' salary and give you a reference. If you want something in between, we'll figure it out. I'm putting the choice in your hands." I thought about walking away. God knows I'd gotten good at walking away from pain over the years. But Jeremy's face kept appearing in my mind. Jeremy crying over Nathan's wooden horse. Jeremy asking questions about the son I'd lost. He wanted to know Nathan. And I wanted to know the man my son had saved. "I want to stay," I said. "Not as your housekeeper. I can't go back to that. But as something. Someone who's allowed to be here. To talk to Jeremy. To be acknowledged." "Done," Victoria said immediately. "And Eleanor? Thank you. For giving Jeremy life. I should have said that 15 years ago. Should have found you somehow and thanked you properly. But I'm saying it now. Thank you. It wasn't enough. It would never be enough. But it was something. The months that followed were a slow process of rebuilding, or maybe just building something that had never existed before. Jeremy and I spent hours together, sometimes talking about Nathan, sometimes not. He showed me his architectural designs and I told him about Nathan's love of building things, of creating. We found connections neither of us had expected. He told me about the dreams he'd had as a child, the ones about the blonde boy. They'd stopped when he was a teenager, but he still remembered them vividly. The boy would give him things and tell him to live well, to be happy, to make the most of his second chance. Whether they were real or just Jeremy's subconscious processing trauma, I didn't know. But they brought me comfort anyway, the idea that some part of Nathan had been with him all these years. Victoria and I would never be friends. The damage was too deep, the betrayal too fundamental. But we learned to coexist, to be civil, to work together for Jeremy's sake. She was trying, in her own rigid way, to make amends. She couldn't quite manage warm, but she managed respectful, which was more than I'd expected. Robert surprised me. He started asking about Nathan, too, about what kind of father Michael had been, about our life before the accident. He seemed genuinely interested, genuinely sorry for our loss. He was the one who suggested the foundation. "Nathan Carter saved my son's life," he said one evening over dinner, a dinner I'd been invited to join rather than serve. "We should honor that. There are so many children waiting for transplants, so many families struggling with medical bills and fear and uncertainty. We could help them, in Nathan's name." The Nathan Carter Foundation was established 6 months after the truth came out. Robert handled the legal work and the funding. Victoria managed the public relations and event planning, and Jeremy designed a beautiful logo featuring a wooden horse. I was on the board, which felt surreal, sitting in meetings with lawyers and accountants, discussing how to best help families facing what I'd faced 15 years ago. We funded medical expenses for children waiting for transplants. We provided counseling for families dealing with the decision to donate organs. We created support groups for transplant recipients struggling with survivor's guilt. Every child we helped, every family we supported, felt like a way of honoring Nathan's sacrifice, of making his death mean something beyond just grief. Jeremy threw himself into the foundation with an intensity that worried me sometimes. He started designing pediatric hospital wings that were bright and welcoming instead of sterile and frightening. He volunteered at support groups, talking to young transplant recipients about his experience, about the dreams he'd had, about learning to live with gratitude instead of guilt. He was good at it, better than anyone expected. He had a gentleness that put people at ease. One afternoon in the foundation office, Jeremy showed me plans for a new children's cardiac center he was designing for Burlington Medical Center. The same hospital where Nathan had died, where I'd signed the papers that changed both our lives. "I want to put his name on it," Jeremy said quietly. "The Nathan Carter Pediatric Cardiac Center. Is that okay?" I couldn't speak for a moment. I just nodded, tears streaming down my face for what felt like the 1,000th time since this all began. Jeremy pulled me into a hug, and I let myself lean against him, feeling the steady beat of Nathan's heart under my cheek. "Thank you," I whispered, "for making his life matter." "It always mattered," Jeremy said. "I just get to make sure the world knows it." Victoria's transformation was slower and less complete than Jeremy's enthusiasm or Robert's pragmatic support, but it was real. She started volunteering at the foundation events, talking to other mothers, other families. I watched her slowly crack open, letting people see past the perfect facade to the frightened woman underneath who'd almost lost her son and had done terrible things to protect him. One evening, almost a year after the truth came out, she found me in the foundation office after everyone else had left. I was going through applications for medical expense grants, trying to decide which families needed help most urgently, and wishing we had enough money to help them all. "I need to tell you something," Victoria said, standing in the doorway like she wasn't sure she was allowed to enter. I gestured to the chair across from my desk. She sat, perfectly straight as always, hands folded in her lap. "I was jealous of you," she said. "When Jeremy first got sick, when we were told he needed a transplant, I was terrified we'd lose him. And then he got Nathan's heart and survived, and I was so grateful, but also so angry. Angry that someone else's child had to die for mine to live. Angry that you'd made this incredible sacrifice and I hadn't. I felt like I owed you something I could never repay, and I hated that feeling. So I convinced myself you didn't deserve acknowledgement, that keeping you away was protecting Jeremy when really I was just protecting myself from having to face what your family gave up for mine." She stopped, swallowed hard. "I'm sorry. I'm so deeply sorry for how I treated you, for the things I said, for trying to control something that was never mine to control. You deserved better. Nathan deserved better." I studied her for a long moment. She looked genuinely remorseful, genuinely changed. But I also knew that apologizing was easier than actually changing, and actions mattered more than words. "I can't forgive you yet," I said honestly. "Maybe someday, but not yet. What you did, keeping that secret, treating me like I was nothing, that hurt in ways I'm still processing. But I appreciate the apology, and I can see you're trying." Victoria nodded, looking almost relieved that I hadn't absolved her immediately. "That's fair, more than fair. But," I added, "I do think you love Jeremy, and I think you were genuinely trying to protect him, even if you went about it in the worst possible way. So, we'll figure out how to move forward. For his sake." "For his sake," Victoria agreed. She left shortly after, and I went back to the grant applications. But something had shifted. Some small piece of the weight I'd been carrying for so long had lightened. I wasn't ready to call it healing yet, but it was something close. Jeremy met someone in the spring. Her name was Sarah, and she was a pediatric nurse at one of the hospitals where the foundation did outreach. She was warm and funny and completely unfazed by the complicated dynamics of Jeremy's family situation. When he introduced us, he was nervous, like he needed my approval, which was touching and ridiculous in equal measure. "She knows about Nathan," he said, after Sarah had left our first dinner together. "About everything. I wanted to be honest from the start." "What did she say?" I asked. "She said Nathan must have been an amazing kid to have a mother like you." Jeremy smiled. "She's right." I liked Sarah immediately. She didn't try too hard or treat me like I was fragile. She asked questions about Nathan naturally, incorporated his story into her understanding of Jeremy without making it the only thing that defined him. When they got engaged 2 years later, I cried happy tears for the first time since before the accident. The wedding was beautiful, held in the Kingston's garden on a perfect June day. Jeremy asked me to walk down the aisle with Victoria and Robert, acknowledged me in his speech as someone who'd given him not just life but a second chance to appreciate it. He wore cufflinks engraved with NC, and in his pocket he carried the wooden horse, his good luck charm. When Sarah got pregnant a year later, they asked if they could use Nathan as the middle name if the baby was a boy. I said yes through tears. Their daughter arrived instead, a healthy, loud, perfect little girl they named Evelyn Nathan Kingston. Jeremy called her Evie, and she had his dark curls and Sarah's green eyes and absolutely no concept of personal space. The first time I held her, feeling her tiny weight in my arms, her small hand gripping my finger, I felt something I hadn't felt in 20 years. Hope. Not the desperate, clinging hope that things might somehow get better, but real, solid hope for the future. Hope that life could be good again. That joy didn't have to be tainted by grief. Evie started calling me Grandma Eleanor when she learned to talk, and neither Jeremy nor Sarah corrected her. Victoria was Grandma Vicky, and I was Grandma Eleanor, and somehow that was okay. We had different roles, different relationships with Jeremy, but we were both family. I still lived in my apartment in Burlington, though it was a much nicer apartment now. The foundation paid me a real salary for my work as a board member and family liaison. I had savings for the first time in my adult life, security, stability. Martha was still my neighbor, though in a different building, and she liked to brag to everyone that she was the one who'd shown me the job listing that changed my life. On the anniversary of Nathan's death, Jeremy and I started a tradition. We'd go to the cemetery in Vermont where Nathan and Michael were buried, and we'd spend the day together. Sometimes we'd talk about Nathan, sharing memories and stories. Sometimes we'd just sit in silence, feeling the weight of loss and the gift of survival in equal measure. Jeremy would bring the wooden horse and set it on Nathan's gravestone, and we'd leave it there until the next visit. "Do you ever regret it?" Jeremy asked me once, 3 years after the truth came out, donating his organs, letting me have his heart. We were sitting under a tree in the cemetery, watching clouds drift across the sky. Evie was napping in her stroller, making little snuffling sounds that made us both smile. "No," I said honestly. "I regret the accident. I regret that Nathan died, that Michael died, that I had to make that choice at all. But given the choice, given the reality that Nathan was already gone, I don't regret giving you life. You've made it mean something. You've honored him in ways I never could have imagined." "He saved me," Jeremy said quietly, "and in a weird way, you saved me too." Before I knew the truth, I was just going through the motions. I had this great life handed to me and I wasn't really appreciating it. But now, knowing what Nathan gave up, what you gave up, I feel like I have to make it count. I have to live well enough for both of us. "You are," I assured him. "You really are." We sat there until Evie woke up, squalling for food and attention, and then we drove back to Boston together. Jeremy dropped me at my apartment, waited until I was inside before driving away. I watched his car disappear around the corner and thought about all the paths that had led us here, all the tragedy and pain and loss that had somehow, impossibly, resulted in something good. Nathan would have liked Jeremy, I thought. He would have been proud to know his heart went to someone who used it so well. 5 years after the truth came out, the Nathan Carter Pediatric Cardiac Center opened in Burlington. The building was beautiful, full of light and color, with a huge wooden horse sculpture in the lobby that Jeremy had commissioned. At the dedication ceremony, I stood on stage with Jeremy and Robert and Victoria and a crowd of families we'd helped through the foundation, and I talked about Nathan for the first time in public. I told them about my shy, brave boy who loved horses and hated thunderstorms. I told them about the worst day of my life and the choice I'd made in my grief. I told them about finding Jeremy, about learning the truth, about the long, complicated journey from anger and pain to something like acceptance. "Nathan lived for 8 years, I said, my voice echoing through the crowd. "But his heart has been beating for 23, and in that time, it's helped save hundreds of other children through the foundation bearing his name. One small boy's tragedy became the catalyst for so much good, and while I would give anything to have him back, I'm grateful that his death wasn't meaningless. I'm grateful that he saved Jeremy. And I'm grateful that Jeremy has spent his life making sure Nathan's legacy lives on." The applause was thunderous, but what mattered more was Jeremy's face, streaming with tears, mouthing thank you across the stage. What mattered was Victoria, openly crying for maybe the second time in her life, reaching out to squeeze my hand. What mattered was little Evie, now 4 years old, holding the wooden horse and asking loudly when we could go see the big one inside. After the ceremony, families came up to thank me, to share their own stories of loss and survival and gratitude. Transplant recipients, organ donor families, people whose lives had been touched by the foundation. Each story was a testament to Nathan's ongoing impact, proof that one small boy's heart had created ripples that extended far beyond anything I could have imagined. As the sun set over Burlington, Jeremy found me standing alone in the lobby, looking up at the massive wooden horse sculpture. He put his arm around my shoulders and we stood there together, two people connected by tragedy and choice and love. "He's still here," Jeremy said quietly. "Nathan, I feel him sometimes, in my dreams, in the work we do, in Evie's laugh. He's still here." I know, I said. And I did. Nathan was in Jeremy's heartbeat, in the center bearing his name, in every child the foundation helped. He was in the wooden horse on my windowsill and the memories I carried and the stories I told Evie about her namesake. My son died 20 years ago, but he never really left. He just changed form, became part of something bigger than any of us. And while the grief would never fully disappear, while I would always miss him with an ache that time couldn't heal, I'd found a way to live with it, to live through it, to build something meaningful from the wreckage. Victoria approached us, Robert beside her. She'd aged in the 5 years since the truth came out, softened in ways I never would have predicted. She reached out tentatively, and I took her hand. We'd never be close, probably never be true friends, but we'd found a way to coexist in the space Nathan and Jeremy had created between us. Thank you, she said simply, for everything. I nodded, accepting the words I'd needed to hear 20 years ago. Better late than never. That night, back in my apartment, I took the wooden horse from the windowsill and held it in my hands. The wood was smooth and warm, worn from years of handling. I traced the scar Nathan had been so upset about, the one I'd told him made it special. Made it his. You did good, baby, I whispered into the empty room. You saved him. You saved so many people. I'm so proud of you. The horse didn't answer, of course. But somewhere in Boston, Nathan's heart was beating steadily in Jeremy's chest. Somewhere in the foundation offices, grant applications were being reviewed that would help desperate families. Somewhere in Burlington, the cardiac center bearing my son's name was ready to save more lives. Nathan was gone, but his impact remained. And I'd finally learned to live not in the shadow of his death, but in the light of what he'd given. It wasn't the life I'd planned, wasn't the happy ending I'd dreamed of when he was born, but it was something. It was enough. I placed the horse back on the windowsill and looked out at the city lights. Tomorrow I'd go to the foundation office. Tomorrow I'd review more applications, attend more meetings, help more families navigate the impossible. Tomorrow I'd video call with Evie and listen to her excited chatter about preschool. Tomorrow I'd keep living, keep moving forward, keep honoring Nathan's memory the only way I knew how, by choosing to live too, fully, messily, imperfectly, but alive. Nathan would have wanted that, and finally after 20 years, I wanted it too.